A small boy found himself alone on a dusty road within a wildlife sanctuary. As he wept, a lion spotted him. The fierce creature fixed its gaze on the boy, unleashing a thunderous roar as it charged. What unfolded next was extraordinary. The lion named King circled the distressed boy, who was now crying louder. It was dawn, and they were alone. King, a towering figure, marched back and forth, his mane billowing in the morning wind. Abruptly, he halted and looked intensely at the boy, whose face was flushed and tear-streaked. The child met the lion's gaze, his eyes brimming with tears. With a fierce snarl, King lifted his head and roared, exposing his sharp teeth. Trapped on the road, the boy had no escape. King let out another roar, his eyes burning with fury as he stared at the boy. King had been a resident of the safari park since James, a dedicated wildlife ranger, rescued him as a cub. James found King curled up beside his deceased mother, a victim of poachers. Too young to fend for himself, King was taken under James's wing, who attended to him at all hours, feeding and nurturing him. Having started his career at the reserve at 16, James knew the importance of assimilating King with other lions quickly to avoid him becoming overly human-dependent. The expansive reserve housed multiple lion prides, and James hoped that one of the seasoned mothers would adopt King. When the cub grew strong enough, he was placed with a lioness who had recently birthed her third cub. She was notably protective, yet one of the gentlest lionesses James had encountered, a mix he believed would benefit King. His intuition proved correct as the lioness welcomed King into her family. Overjoyed, James watched over the years as King matured and eventually drifted from the pride. As a male lion, King was destined to lead a solitary life, and leaving the pride's security marked a perilous phase. Although safer within the reserve, King could still clash with dominant males over territory or mates, a natural yet risky challenge. James's favorite aspect of working at the reserve was observing the lion prides, but he paid special attention to King, having saved him as a cub. The bond he formed with King gave James a deep personal stake in the lion's well-being. However, King was about to do something unimaginable to the young ranger. Despite his rough beginnings, King had thrived in the reserve. His courage, formidable demeanor, and imposing size quickly made him a dominant male within the sanctuary. James was aware of the numerous battles King had won. While the violence was harsh, it mirrored the natural order, as the animals lived as they would in the wild. The key difference at the reserve was the protection from poachers and the availability of a veterinary team to aid the animals, many of which were endangered. So, while James occasionally worried about King, he knew the lion was in the safest possible environment. Despite the reserve's efforts to protect its wildlife, poachers had begun to infiltrate its borders. Fortunately, no animals had been harmed, but the urgency to fortify the reserve's perimeters was increasing. Amidst these tensions, King, a lone lion, would have an unexpected encounter due to these vulnerabilities. He stirred from his sleep as dawn approached. This was when the lions thrived in the cooler morning air. With a grumble from his belly, King stretched leisurely, signaling the start of his solitary hunt. As a lone lion, finding food was more challenging than for those in prides, but King managed. As he rose and stretched once more, an unusual noise and a distinct familiar scent halted him. Intrigued, King followed his instincts and soon found a young boy crying alone on the dirt road. The lion paused, his mouth parting slightly as he moved closer to the child. The boy, barely 3 years old, sat crying under the hood of his blue jacket. King maintained a cautious distance, circling the boy while keeping a watchful eye on him. The child's cries were piercing, and King seemed increasingly uneasy, pacing as if torn by the situation. Suddenly he stopped. A new scent wafted through the air, causing King to tense and stare intently at the child, his face tear-stained and swollen. With a fearsome roar, King displayed his teeth, stunning the boy into silence. Though his gaze was fierce, it wasn't directed at the child, but beyond him. In a swift motion, King charged, leaping over the boy's head. Apologies for the break. Before we proceed with our tale, please take a moment to hit like and subscribe to our channel. Your support means everything to us. Thank you so much. A loud crash startled a young boy, causing him to whirl around. There, a second lion lay trapped under King's formidable presence, as the larger lion roared and struck with his powerful claws. The two beasts clashed briefly, with King clearly dominating the encounter. Meanwhile, James was making his way along a dusty path, oblivious to the extraordinary scene unfolding just ahead. The second lion writhed, trying to escape King's grip. Just then, the ranger turned the bend and caught sight of the combating lions, a not entirely uncommon scene in his line of work. However, spotting a small boy mere steps from the fray made his stomach turn. Baffled by how the child had entered the reserve, he recognized the immediate danger. James accelerated, his jeep speeding towards the child. As King's opponent managed to break free and stagger off, the dominant lion let out a bellow and redirected his attention to the boy. Though James's bond with King was deep, any harm to the child could spell catastrophe for the reserve. But the next moment nearly drove James to veer off the road in astonishment. The massive lion settled next to the boy, forming a protective shield as he surveyed the area for any further threats to the child. What James had observed wasn't a mere territorial skirmish between lions over a meal. King had been safeguarding the boy. He had fought off the other lion to rescue the child. James's mind raced back to the day he discovered King, a tiny cub, whimpering beside his deceased mother. Had King sensed a kindred spirit in the tearful child? Whatever the case, James was stunned. He fervently hoped his assessment of King was correct because, despite the lion's protective stance, he needed to move the boy to safety and unravel the events that led him there. If King resisted his approach to the child, James was uncertain of his next move. James shut off the engine and gently opened the jeep door. Among all the rangers at the reserve, he was the sole one King trusted. The young ranger had spent countless hours observing and tracking the lion without any disturbance. King always seemed aware of his presence, perhaps retaining a memory of James rescuing him as a cub, which seemed to foster a unique bond between them. James hoped this connection would now work in his favor. As he stepped out of the safety of his vehicle, King's gaze followed James as he approached cautiously. The enormous lion scrutinized him, seemingly evaluating his intentions. After a moment, with a slow, deliberate stretch, King stood and ambled away. James waited patiently, respecting the silent agreement between them. Once the lion had moved a safe distance away, he gently lifted the boy into his arms. With King nearby, the boy had been serene, but now, separated from the lion, he began to weep again. Holding the child close, James drove slowly back to the reserve office, his mind whirling with questions. Why was the boy left alone on the road? James was also still processing King's extraordinary behavior. The quickest way to seek answers about the boy was to check the CCTV footage, hoping it had captured something crucial. Reviewing the CCTV footage from the reserve boundaries, James's heart sank. The video revealed a battered old car pulling up just outside the reserve's perimeter. He could barely discern a young man behind the wheel. Moments later, a young woman emerged from the passenger side, clutching a child. She glanced around hurriedly, then seemed to spot a vulnerable spot in the fence. Struggling briefly, she managed to push through with the child and set him down on the dirt path where James later found him. James watched, heart aching, as the woman tenderly kissed the boy on the forehead before returning to the car and driving away, leaving the child behind. The camera captured the small boy looking around for his parents, who were now nowhere in sight. James was left bewildered. The kiss had been gentle and loving, suggesting the woman felt she had no other option but to leave her child there. But why inside the reserve, where dangers lurked? Perhaps she hoped the security cameras were monitored, ensuring the boy would be quickly found, or maybe she believed a ranger would soon come by. James realized he might never fully understand their reasons. Determined, he resolved to do everything possible to locate the boy's parents, though he suspected they might already be far beyond reach. After watching the footage, James prepared a meal for the little boy, who seemed to have settled down somewhat. Sensing an opportunity, James gently attempted to coax some information from him before he would need to involve the authorities. The child appeared scared but managed to share that his name was Michael. As James made the necessary but tough phone calls to the authorities, he observed Michael cautiously eating his meal. A poignant realization struck him. Years ago, James had rescued King, the lion cub, after his mother's death, and now he had seen King protect Michael, a child abandoned by his parents. It seemed like a cycle of guardianship had completed itself, except this time, James worried about what awaited Michael beyond the reserve's safety. Unlike King, who had remained under his watch, Michael would eventually have to leave. The desperation driving Michael's parents to leave him likely stemmed from the harsh economic realities faced by many villagers around the reserve. The costs of raising a child could be overwhelming. Recalling the footage of the young woman and Michael's subsequent abandonment, James was deeply saddened by the uncertainty and potential hardships that lay ahead for the boy once he left the protective boundaries of the reserve. As the authorities arrived, Michael was engrossed in videos on James's phone. The meal had revived the little boy's spirits, and he was animatedly pointing outside, saying "lion" and mimicking a roar, much to James's amusement. James discussed Michael's future with the authorities, learning that if no family members were found, the boy would be placed in an orphanage with the hope of adoption. The thought of such significant changes and instability troubled James, who dreaded how they might impact Michael. Acting on impulse, James offered to care for Michael, while the authorities continued their search for his family. It was a bold decision, given his lack of experience with children, but Michael had quickly endeared himself to James, much like King had years ago. A few days later, James received disheartening news. Michael's family remained untraceable, and the boy was set to be transferred to an orphanage. Observing Michael, who had adapted remarkably well in such a brief period, James was struck by the bond they had formed. Just the day before, he had taken Michael to see the lions, and the child's joy at the sight of the cubs was infectious. It reminded James why he loved the reserve so deeply. Despite the looming questions about his past that Michael would inevitably face, James felt reassured knowing that he could offer the boy a narrative filled with love and bravery. He could tell Michael about his parents' love, despite the circumstances of his abandonment, and about the extraordinary way a lion had protected him, ensuring his safety. James knew he would be there to share these stories and more, providing Michael with a sense of continuity and care in his life. The decision was clear in the young man's heart. He would not send Michael to an orphanage. Instead, the ranger decided to adopt him. The months that followed were challenging as James navigated the complex adoption process to become Michael's legal guardian. After everything was settled, the newly formed father-son duo took a drive to the wildlife park to celebrate their new beginning and see the lions. Near the spot where Michael had originally been found, they spotted King, the lion. As their jeep cruised past, King noticed the small boy peering at him from the window. In a leisurely gesture, the lion lifted his head, recognizing not just the man who had saved him, but now also the young boy. James looked forward to the day he could share King's full story with his son when he was old enough to understand. Now, with both a rescued lion and a rescued child in his life, James's family was certainly unique, but he cherished it deeply. Did this story touch your heart? If you were in James's shoes, what would you have done? Would you have taken the step to adopt the child or left him in the care of an orphanage? Have you ever encountered a lion up close? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed the tale, please subscribe to our channel and give us a thumbs up. James truly demonstrated the size of his heart. It's love that requires bravery, not fear. Bye. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next video. Have a wonderful day.